Despite his head being covered in scars and his face full of wrinkles, with even a fly having flown into his eye, Dracula and the nuns fought a fierce battle over him. Just a month ago, Harker was a successful, ambitious lawyer. His company had sent him to handle some business for an old count. However, halfway through the journey, the coachman forced him out of the carriage, refusing to go any closer to the count's castle, no matter how much money was offered. The locals pressed a crucifix into his hands for protection, and others looked at him with pity, because those who visited the count's castle never came out alive. Before Harker could process the strangeness of the situation, the count's carriage whisked him away to the castle. As soon as he rang the doorbell, countless bats flew out of the castle, swarming around and biting him. But when the castle gates opened, the bats scattered in fear. Driven by both his career and his love for his fiancée, he stepped into the eerie castle where the aged and decaying Count Dracula had been waiting for him for some time. The dining table was laid out with a feast, all prepared for Harker. The Count himself seemed to refrain from eating, instead staring intently at Harker as he dined. Harker's purpose was to assist the Count in purchasing a few properties, and once the paperwork was signed, he planned to leave. But the Count seemed to have taken a liking to Harker's proper British accent, and insisted that he stay to tutor him in English. With little choice, Harker remained to help the Count improve his language skills. The castle was a maze, with spiral staircases stretching endlessly upward. Dracula personally helped Harker settle in. When Harker took out his small mirror, the Count immediately shattered it. Harker didn't give it much thought, but while picking up the pieces, he accidentally cut his finger. The scent of blood tempted Dracula, forcing him to leave quickly, with a promise to meet again the following night. After the Count's departure, Harker discovered a plea for help scratched into the window frame, carved with fingernails. Startled, he leaned out and spotted a woman's figure on the upper floors. There was something deeply unsettling and eerie about the entire castle. Yet Harker slept soundly, dreaming vividly of his fiancée, Mina. Every morning, Harker woke up feeling utterly exhausted, as if drained of all his energy, while Count Dracula grew increasingly youthful. Harker began to contemplate escaping, but the castle's labyrinthine layout made it impossible to find the exit without the Count's guidance. And being a kind-hearted man, he didn't want to abandon the woman who had called for help. Dracula never appeared during the day, leaving Harker free to explore the castle. The woman's figure would often flicker in and out of sight. After several more days, Harker felt as though he had aged 10 years. His hairline had noticeably receded, while the once ancient Count now looked middle-aged. Harker couldn't bear to stay any longer. His explorations led him deeper into the castle, where, in the depths of the basement, he found numerous bodies sealed in coffins. Panicked, Harker stumbled into a hidden chamber where he found a coffin with Dracula's name carved on it. Cautiously, he peeked inside. When Harker awoke again, it was as though he had forgotten the previous night's terrifying ordeal. His mind was foggy, his limbs weak. Meanwhile, the Count had fully regained his youth and insisted that Harker write a letter to his fiancée, reassuring her that he was safe. Suddenly, images of Harker's intimate moments with his fiancée flashed through his mind, but they weren't dreams. In reality, it had been Dracula pinning him down. To protect his fiancée, Harker had no choice but to comply with Dracula's demands. Meanwhile, Dracula had already begun constructing wooden boxes, preparing for Harker to soon join the ranks of the undead. However, Harker was no ordinary man. He was a well-educated, sharp-minded lawyer. He managed to uncover the secrets of the castle. Hidden within the portrait of the architect's wife was the castle's map. Once he pieced the map together, Harker discovered a shortcut out of the maze-like castle. The entrance lay just behind the architect's painting. Pushing open the stone door, he did indeed find a passage, but it led to a secret chamber. Inside, he found the woman who had previously cried out for help, living inside a massive wooden box, muttering nonsensical things.
I'm hungry. He only gives me scraps.
The woman suddenly appeared behind him without making a sound. When Harker next awoke, He found himself imprisoned inside a wooden box. Dracula pulled him out and used a wooden stake to kill the female vampire. She had dared to claim the prey of the original vampire. By this time, Harker was on the brink of death. Dracula brought him to the balcony as the sun was about to set. The Count wanted Harker to describe the beauty of the sunset before he died. Harker, however, refused to cooperate and even spat at him. Dracula then announced his plan to head to London, promising Harker that he would visit Mina. Desperate, Harker crawled back into the shadows, begging Dracula to spare his fiancée. In response, Dracula killed him. Not long after, Harker came back to life, having entered the transformation stage. To Dracula's surprise, Harker still retained his human consciousness, unlike the mindless zombies in the castle's cellar. When Harker turned around, the sunlight reflecting off the crucifix on his chest caused Dracula great pain. Harker then fell from the castle, only to be rescued by Sister Agatha. After Harker recounted his ordeal, Agatha was overcome with excitement. The legend was true. Count Dracula feared sunlight. However, another nun quietly wept. She was none other than Harker's fiancée, Mina, who had traveled all the way from London to search for him. Despite Harker's transformation into something neither fully human nor fully vampire, Mina still loved him deeply. Suddenly, a swarm of bats stormed into the abbey, attacking Mina. Dracula had followed them there. Agatha quickly rallied the nuns to fight Dracula, but Harker's gaze was fixed on the blood trickling from Mina's forehead. Unaware of his change, Mina innocently rushed into Harker's arms. Harker wiped the blood from her forehead with his fingers, then greedily sucked it from his hand. Since the sun had not yet set, Dracula was forced to hide within the body of a wild dog, blocking the abbey's entrance. Once night fell, Dracula tore his way out of the dog's back, a gruesome sight that made the nuns retch. Led by Agatha, the nuns raised their wooden stakes. From outside, Dracula bellowed furiously, but none of the nuns dared meet his gaze. At this moment, Agatha stepped forward, opened the iron gate, and furiously rebuked Dracula, demanding he leave. Though Dracula was seething with rage, he could not enter the abbey. Agatha had confirmed her suspicion. A vampire could not step foot into a home without an invitation from its owner. Seeing that he couldn't enter the abbey, Dracula launched another attack. He promised the nuns behind Agatha that the first one to invite him in would not only survive, but also be granted eternal life. As for the others, they would all be torn to pieces. Agatha remained calm, her face full of mockery. She had faith in her sisters, but the human heart is vulnerable to temptation. To Agatha's surprise, the first to succumb to temptation was the abbess. Fortunately, before she could speak, Agatha had a plan. She sliced open her palm with a dagger, letting her blood flow freely. The once mighty Dracula was instantly reduced to a beast driven by desire. Like feeding a stray dog, Agatha flung her blood at Dracula's feet. Once again, Agatha diffused Dracula's attempts to turn the nuns against each other, strengthening their resolve. Dracula found himself deeply intrigued by this extraordinary woman. By licking the blood from the dagger, he learned more about Agatha's background.
Van Helsing! Agatha Van Helsing.
His interest in her grew stronger. She was a woman bold enough to challenge him. When Agatha returned to the chapel, she found that Harker had already driven a stake through his own heart. He had entered the final stages of transformation, but couldn't bear to harm his fiancée, so he ended his life with the stake. Mina, staring at her fiancée's lifeless body, was filled with hatred toward Dracula. Dracula scaled the rooftop with ease. At his soft command, Harker came back to life. Vampires couldn't commit suicide, only others could kill them. Dracula offered to end Harker's suffering, but only if Harker invited him in. Meanwhile, the abbess led the other nuns in prayer in the main hall. With one swift stroke, Dracula decapitated her. The terrified nuns scattered, but a pack of wild dogs blocked the exits. Dracula tossed the abbess's head into the crowd like a bouquet, declaring that whoever it hit would be granted the chance to be reborn. As he slaughtered the nuns, Agatha and Mina hid in the basement, forming a protective barrier with Holy Communion wafers. Neither woman could understand who had invited Dracula into the abbey. The screams above them eventually subsided, and a figure stepped into the room. It was Harker. Full of shame, he admitted that it was he who had invited Dracula. As a newly turned vampire, Harker was unable to enter the protective circle. Despite Agatha's warnings, Mina invited her fiancé inside. The moment Harker stepped over the barrier, his face twisted with malice. Mina noticed something strange. There were 2 heartbeats coming from Harker's chest. Harker ripped the skin from his face, revealing Dracula's handsome features beneath. Just as he could hide inside a wild dog, he could also parasitize a human. Mina was frozen in fear, while Agatha remained calm. She bared her neck, offering herself in exchange for Mina's life. Dracula, amused, remarked that he had a large appetite and could easily consume both of them. Agatha, however, held a dagger to her throat, threatening to kill herself, knowing that vampires detested feeding on the dead. After weighing his options, Dracula had no choice but to let Mina go.
Sucker.
More than 50 years later, Count Dracula once again encountered the Bavarian Grand Princess on a ship bound for London. The once beautiful woman had aged significantly, while Dracula remained youthful. Having recently fed only on Englishmen, Dracula's German had grown rusty. So he took a moment on deck to devour the German-born first mate. When he returned to the dining room, his fluent German left the Grand Princess astonished.
You killed a crew member just so you could show off in German.
The nun sitting across from Dracula, playing chess and discussing the ship's curious happenings, was none other than Agatha, a descendant of his old foe, Van Helsing. As they played, Dracula recounted some amusing events aboard the ship. The Grand Princess was quite talkative, and she challenged Dracula to guess the special gift she received at her coming-of-age celebration. Without hesitation, Dracula replied, "A pineapple," as if he had been there himself. The Grand Princess was dumbfounded, finally confirming that the man before her had been the mysterious guest who danced with her that evening. That same night, her mother had mysteriously disappeared. Dracula had waited 50 years to finally savor this long-anticipated vintage. In order to roam the ship during the day, Dracula expelled a thick fog that enveloped the vessel. 2 passengers vanished overnight, and while the captain tried to calm the rest of the guests, no one took it seriously. That same night, another girl, separated from the group, was murdered by Dracula on deck, her blood soaking into the wood. Only then did the passengers realize there was a serial killer among them. Throughout all of this, the guest from Cabin 9 had not made an appearance, which aroused suspicion. The captain was forced to admit that the occupant of Cabin 9 was suffering from a contagious disease and was the ship's largest benefactor, thus avoiding contact with others. As the passengers debated how to apprehend the killer, a sailor accidentally fell from the mast. His mangled leg was a temptation Dracula could barely resist. To avoid revealing himself, he fought the urge to feed and retreated to the dining room, masking his struggle with a stiff, forced smile. The temptation of fresh flesh gnawed at him as he could hear the blood coursing through the veins of every passenger. When the others looked around again, Dracula had vanished without a trace. At this point, Agatha began to understand Dracula's true intentions.
Ha! The boat was a dress rehearsal for life in England.
Meanwhile, a sailor had a vivid dream of the missing girl riding atop him, though he felt sure he was dreaming. Yet, the sensation of her touch felt all too real. Little did he know that the kiss of a vampire could drain a victim's blood while lulling them into a beautiful dream. When the others arrived, they found only a pool of decayed flesh where the sailor had been. This feeding had cost Dracula his usual elegance, and he had failed to properly dispose of the body. It was no longer simply a matter of a serial killer. The passengers demanded that the captain search Cabin 9. The captain reluctantly agreed. At this moment, Agatha interrupted the story. Her curiosity piqued. She wanted to know who exactly the mysterious passenger in Cabin 9 was. Dracula remained silent, his eyes concealing the answer. It was only then that Agatha noticed the castle swaying back and forth, as if it were a lone boat adrift on the sea.
I'm in cabin number 9.
After indulging in Agatha's blood, Dracula heard footsteps outside the door. He quickly twisted the situation, framing Agatha as the serial killer. The terrified cook demanded that Agatha be hanged immediately, but the captain and the doctor were skeptical. How could such a frail woman have the strength to commit these murders? Dracula fanned the flames of fear, knowing that terror can cloud judgment. Just as the cook was about to kick the barrel out from under Agatha, she came up with a plan. Not only did she confess to being the murderer, but she also claimed to be a vampire. Such an outrageous statement piqued everyone's curiosity. If a vampire had been responsible for the killings, everything would make sense. Agatha, ever the clever woman, fully embraced the role of a vampire and began to deduce the method behind each of the 4 murders. Her analysis was logical and well supported. When everyone had fully bought into the idea of a vampire being the culprit, all Agatha needed to do was shift the blame back to Dracula. As Dracula approached, Agatha bit her lip and spat a mouthful of blood at his face. Dracula quickly turned away from the group, struggling to suppress his bloodlust. This suspicious behavior naturally drew the attention of the others. Agatha seized the opportunity to clear her name. The group hastily formed makeshift crosses with their fingers. Realizing his cover was blown, Dracula kicked over the barrel and escaped back to the cabin amidst the chaos. The group quickly freed Agatha. With half the crew gone due to Dracula's ravenous appetite, the remaining passengers, led by Sister Agatha, managed to regain some control. However, someone on board was harboring ill intentions. A wealthy young man, taking advantage of the doctor's momentary distraction while gathering supplies, quietly drew the curtains. Without the barrier of sunlight, Dracula instantly teleported into the room. The wealthy man, offering up the doctor as a gift, hoped to become Dracula's companion. The doctor, brandishing a scalpel in the shape of a cross, kept Dracula at bay. Unfortunately, the wealthy man betrayed the doctor and shot him dead. Seizing the moment, the doctor's daughter swallowed poison. Since vampires don't drink the blood of the dead, Dracula lost interest in her. Instead, he turned his attention to the wealthy man, who met his end at Dracula's fangs. Just then, the apprentice sailor stumbled upon the grisly scene. Meanwhile, because Dracula could only rest in the soil of his homeland, Agatha had left just 1 box of earth on the ship, planning to trap him. She also nailed a Bible to the deck, forming a protective circle. The terrified apprentice sailor rushed to inform the others. No one dared venture out alone after that. In their spare time, Agatha recounted her battles with Dracula to the group. Suddenly, she was struck with a chilling realization. Dracula could inhabit the bodies of others. The apprentice sailor was the only one who had seen Dracula and returned unharmed. Upon hearing this, the others grew suspicious, clutching wooden stakes in secret. There was only one way to confirm whether the apprentice had been possessed by Dracula. He needed to step outside the protective circle. The moment the apprentice stepped outside, Dracula instantly appeared before him. The group hurriedly pulled the apprentice back into safety. The two stood in confrontation, separated by the Bible. The wealthy merchant, disgusted by Dracula's arrogance, had more faith in the revolver tucked in his coat than in the ridiculous Bible. Sensing a weakness, Dracula began to taunt the merchant, provoking him relentlessly. Ignoring the others' warnings, the merchant stepped outside the protective circle and fired several shots into Dracula's chest. Agatha seized the moment and threw a kerosene lamp at Dracula, setting him ablaze. Howling in pain, Dracula jumped into the sea. With no ships in the vicinity, Dracula had no chance of making it back to shore anytime soon. However, Agatha warned the others that it wasn't time to celebrate yet, and she herself could not return to England. It was then that Agatha revealed she had already begun her transformation. Her fingernails had all fallen off, yet she felt no pain. Deeply moved by her selflessness and bravery, the captain decided that he too would stay behind and go down with the ship. The cook and the apprentice, on the other hand, escaped on a lifeboat. Before the end, the captain suggested they spend their final moments sharing a drink on the deck. As Agatha started to rise, she noticed something odd about the feel of the mattress. Dracula, too, invited Agatha to the deck for a drink, unaware that the captain still had one last breath left. The captain asked Agatha to stall for time while he prepared to blow up the ship. When Agatha reached the deck, she distracted Dracula by starting a conversation, asking why he feared the cross. Dracula explained that the cross was a symbol of the church, and the church had oppressed the people for centuries. While feeding on blood, he also absorbed their deep-seated fear of the cross. Suddenly, an explosion erupted from the cabin, shaking the entire ship. No one knew how much time had passed before divers discovered a coffin at the bottom of the sea. Dracula punched his way out of the coffin and swam to the surface, finally stepping onto British soil, but time had passed. The world had changed. Above him came a loud, unfamiliar roar, and a blinding light engulfed him. The Van Helsing Foundation had him surrounded with heavy weaponry. The leader bore a striking resemblance to his old nemesis. Dracula stared in disbelief at the familiar face and softly uttered, "Agatha." The woman, however, was unmoved. Dracula quickly realized that she wasn't Agatha. Humans operating massive steel machines made Dracula uneasy. He was curious. How long had he been asleep? The woman, Zoe, was Agatha's great-great-granddaughter. She had inherited her ancestors' mission and had dedicated her life to studying vampires. A woman woke up to find a strange man in her home. Dracula, having just fed, didn't attack her right away. Only then did she realize that it was her husband who had let him in. No matter how much she called out, her husband didn't respond from the living room. When she finally got out of bed, she discovered that the refrigerator had been tied shut with rope, one of Dracula's quirks, locking away the drained bodies of his victims. Dracula was able to witness the beauty of a sunset on TV for the first time, while the woman cowered in the corner, terrified. To Dracula, this messy and cramped house was 1,000 times better than his vast castle. The rapid advancements of the modern world were far beyond Dracula's imagination. Looking at his true reflection in the mirror, he smashed it with a punch. Just then, a sound came from upstairs. The woman took advantage of Dracula's momentary distraction and fled. Upstairs, in the hallway, Dracula found an iron coffin and a cell phone. When he answered the call, Zoe ordered him to surrender and lie inside the coffin. Dracula, confident in his hiding spot, remained unafraid of sunlight. And Dracula recoiled, terrified, into a corner. He neither agreed nor refused Zoe's demands. Instead, he insisted on meeting her in person. Zoe, just like her ancestor Agatha, fearlessly entered the house alone. She discovered the male homeowner, folded and stuffed inside the refrigerator. However, Dracula didn't anticipate that Zoe's blood was toxic. Not only did he vomit it all out, but he also felt incredibly weak. When he woke up again, he found himself locked inside an iron coffin. Through the gaps, he saw that the founder of the Van Helsing Foundation was none other than Mina, Harker's fiancée. It turned out that after Dracula had let Mina go, she sought out Agatha's descendants, and together they established this organization solely to eliminate Dracula. The prison designed to hold Dracula was quite ingenious, utilizing sunlight to compress his living space. Out of humanitarian concern, Zoe even provided him with a tablet for entertainment. Humans no longer feared vampires. Besides studying blood samples, Dracula was considered a unique specimen and a living history book. Dracula finally understood why Zoe's blood was toxic to him. She was suffering from cancer, and it was in the advanced stages. Just then, a lawyer arrived, requesting the release of his client. After learning to use the internet, Dracula's first task was to find himself a lawyer. Once he moved out of the legal system, Zoe could only release Dracula after sunset, rendering her lifelong efforts in vain. Before leaving, Dracula stealthily pocketed an intern's phone, which allowed him to connect with the intern's secret crush, the socialite Lucy. Zoe's deteriorating health was no longer sufficient to continue resisting Dracula. Reflecting on Dracula's last words, that blood is life, and everyone he had consumed flowed through his veins, Zoe decided to drink Dracula's blood. Immediately, she dreamed of her ancestor Agatha's experiences as if she were living them herself. Dracula and Lucy had been together for 3 months, and the scar on Lucy's neck never healed. What attracted Dracula most to her was her fearless attitude toward life and death. The two often met in graveyards, listening to the dead struggle beneath the ground. Eventually, Dracula decided to make Lucy his bride. The transformation process was no different from death. Lucy's body grew cold while her soul screamed in the mirror, unseen by any living person. However, Dracula had miscalculated. In modern society, cremation was the norm. Lucy's body was ultimately sent to the furnace. Though her body couldn't move, her consciousness was fully awake. No matter how much she screamed, no sound came out. After Lucy's corpse was sent into the furnace, she happened to complete her transformation and woke up. She was refined by the flames for several hours. It wasn't until nightfall that Lucy broke open the cremation furnace. The noise attracted the attention of a security guard. After Lucy drained the guard's blood, she caught a glimpse of her stunning reflection in the mirror. Meanwhile, Dracula was in his mansion, preparing fine wine, eagerly awaiting Lucy's return. He didn't expect that the first visitor would be Van Helsing, Zoe. The intern Zoe brought along was treated by Dracula as another fine vintage. After drinking Dracula's blood, Zoe encountered her ancestor Agatha in the realm of consciousness. Just as Dracula had said, every person he consumed lived on in his blood. Inspired by Agatha, Zoe finally understood why Dracula feared sunlight, crosses, and more. The two women united in purpose to expose the lies that had persisted for centuries. Not long after, the doorbell rang again. Dracula, filled with confidence, assumed it must be Lucy. The table reflected Lucy's stunning beauty. She had once been the goddess of desire for the intern, Jack. Yet now, Jack avoided her entirely, not daring to look her in the eye. Zoe handed her a cell phone. Lucy raised it, pressed the shutter, and finally saw her true appearance. No matter how much Dracula comforted her, Lucy couldn't accept it. She feared not death, but losing her beauty. In a bid to liberate his goddess, Jack leaned in for a kiss. Lucy had long recognized the wooden stake hidden behind him. As Lucy turned to ashes, Dracula was greatly displeased. Zoe remarked that the little interlude was over, and it was time to get down to business. She ordered Jack to leave, as Dracula would never allow a living person to witness what was to come. Under Dracula's shocked gaze, Zoe climbed onto the dining table and leaped, tearing down the curtains. By then, it was bright outside, and the scorching sunlight poured over Dracula. He writhed in agony on the ground, but suddenly he realized that his skin was not burning. Dracula's worldview shattered. The so-called vampire curse was nothing more than habits transformed into rumors, strict confines that paranoid Dracula had imposed on himself. Through the tales told by the world, he had come to believe in the curse as well. His fear of the curse was, at its core, a fear of death. His ancestors had all been warriors who died in battle, and as the only coward in the family, he hid in the shadows, stealing the lives of others. Zoe quietly awaited death, something Dracula could never do. He carefully experienced the sunlight, feeling a warmth he had never known. 500 years had passed like a fleeting moment, and he had never truly lived. Thanks to Agatha and Zoe, he awakened from his self-deception. Watching Zoe's eyes gradually fade, he resolved to sacrifice his remaining endless years to perform an act of kindness, to fulfill a conquest. In the blood-soaked world, Zoe and Dracula intertwined.